Well, we will be finishing up Matthew tonight, looking at the final chapter, chapter 28. Appreciate Gary's going to take over teaching on Wednesday nights after this. Give me a little break. I've been teaching, I think, since back in April, maybe April or May, when we started the Leviticus study, and it'll be nice to have a break and just able to be a participant for a while. So I appreciate that. And then I'm not sure what we're studying next. What are we studying after Matthew? We don't even know yet. There's just a smorgasbord of opportunities for us to be able to choose from. So there'll be lots of planning between now and the next couple of weeks. So Matthew ends, of course, with the resurrection of Jesus. The story of Jesus' death would be a remarkable story, but it would be kind of a pointless story if it didn't continue after that. I mean, everything that we've learned about Jesus up to this point is good stuff, and it's important stuff, and we're thankful for it, and we learn from it. But if it doesn't end, if the story doesn't end with Jesus' resurrection, then what was the point? Because that really is the lesson for us, that sin leads to death. I mean, that's what brought Jesus' death about. It was sin. And sin leads to death, but there is hope because there is resurrection after death. And if Jesus is not able to be raised, or if there's no resurrection for Jesus after his death, then we have no hope for a resurrection after the sins that we have committed. So it is a happy ending to the story. I do want to go back and pick up just the last little bit of Matthew 27, because as usual we didn't get a full covering of that because we ran out of time. Chuck with his bell. He's going to be your problem from now on, Gary. So we had gotten down, and I want to pick up, we talked a little bit about the centurion kind of in verse 54, and then we kind of gave a cursory little quick covering of the last little bit, but there's a couple of things that fit in with the beginning of Matthew 28 that I want to pick out of the last 10 verses or so of chapter 27. Beginning in verse 55, who is there present at the crucifixion? Many women were there looking on from a distance. And what do we know about these women? They were following Jesus. They were from Galilee. Where was Jesus from? He was a Galilean. He was born in, or not born in Galilee, but his family was from that region, Nazareth, and hailed from that region. So they ministered to him. It's interesting I don't know what that would look like, ministering to him during the crucifixion, but then there was the process of preparing the body for burial after the crucifixion. That process had to be rushed because of the coming Sabbath at his death. They had to remove him from the cross and kind of get him situated quickly because the Sabbath was coming, and that was a day that they couldn't be engaged in those activities. So the ministering that took place immediately after Jesus' crucifixion and death and removal from the cross would have been not complete. It wouldn't have been all that they wanted to do to prepare his body for a proper burial. So who was among those women? Some of them are named for us. Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and mother of the sons of Zebedee, Salome. Okay? And this is kind of one of those things now. I mean, the name Mary and the name James in the New Testament, there's a bunch of both of those. And so here just in this, we read two Marys and there's other Marys that come along that we're gonna talk about as well. But so it can get, you almost need a flow chart. I probably should have put a picture up on the board. We could draw it all out and measure it of who the Marys are that we're talking about. But there were several of them. And this James and Joseph, that, you know, the second Mary is the mother of James and Joseph. Who was that? Mother of Jesus. Okay. Because Jesus had brothers who were named James and Joseph. Okay. Okay. Well, he definitely had a brother named James. It's a good thing that Matthew 28 is short and there's not many questions tonight, because I knew this part was going to be interesting discussion, because there's so much potential for confusion here. And even after I read through stuff, it just keeping everything straight is, like I said, I should have drawn a picture. That's it, and that's what we're going to get to at the beginning of chapter 28, because Mary, and look at verse 61. It says Mary Magdalene was there, and the other Mary sitting opposite the grave. So you would assume that's the Mary already identified in verse 56, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Joseph. And then in 28 verse 1, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. So presumably the Mary that's already been identified. So who is that other Mary is the thing that we're delving into now. Well, there were two different Marys that did that. One of them would have been Mary Magdalene was one of them that anointed Jesus in Luke chapter 7? And then the other Mary would have been Mary, the sister of Lazarus, because there was Mary and Martha, the sister of Lazarus, and that was Mary of Bethany. So there's Mary Magdalene, who was from Magdala, and there was Mary of Bethany, who was Lazarus' sister, and she was the one who would have anointed his feet before his burial that we studied just a couple of weeks ago. So she would not have been the mother of James and Joseph. That's not the Mary we're talking about. John 19, each of the gospel writers has just a little different different account. John 19, and let's see. Verse 20. Okay, so therefore those soldiers and his mother's, okay, so his mother, who was Mary, and his mother's sister, who was Mary, the wife of Clopas. How do you have two sisters both named Mary? But two different Mary, okay, two different people. So there was the sister, okay, because some of the stuff that I read said that Clopas, all right, that this Mary, all right, see, can't trust everything you read on the internet. And that's a quote from Abraham Lincoln, by the way. He said that. Don't trust everything you read on the internet. Okay, so now I'm thoroughly confused. Nothing better than being thoroughly confused in front of 80 people. Or is this? Yeah, that's about 85, no, maybe 90 people. How confused is this guy? So John chapter 20, also verse 1 says Mary Magdalene. So and this is a different day, so this is when they came to the tomb. And John, she's the only one mentioned by name that comes to the tomb, but he does, as he's talking about them, he talks about the women in plural, and when she is talking about what she experiences, she says we. So John is acknowledging that there were other people there, but Mary Magdalene is the only one he mentions by name. And Matthew has Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. Mark 16 has some other names mentioned. Um, 16 verse 1, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. So there's three women that Mark mentioned: Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and then Salome. And that was on the Sabbath. That was on the first day. That was on the resurrection day. Back in earlier chapter, verse 40, Mark says there were some women looking on from a distance: Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the Less, and Joseph and Salome. So there's the one that I was looking for. Who was Mary the mother of James and Joseph? That was not James. That was not the James and John that we often think about. That was James and Joseph. James the Less, who was one of the apostles, his mother's name was Mary. And so now you've got you confused. So James and Joseph, one of them says Joseph, one of them says Joseph, and I think those are the same guys. So Mary, so we've got Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Jesus, Mary of Bethany, Lazarus' sister, Mary the mother of James, who was James the Less. We've got Mary the wife of Clopas that we read about. Which one was that? In John? Okay. So there's 5 Marys. I'm telling you.
When they did it, they should have maybe did it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or something.
Yeah. Should drew straws or something. I don't know. But so this demonstrates what? Confusion. There were a lot of women who were involved and who were very supportive of Jesus and who were concerned about what was going on, and they were invested in the ministry of Jesus and the life of Jesus. And they were there by choice. They were not being forced to be there. They were his followers just as much as the disciples were his followers. The 12 were his followers. So they played an important role. And while it's easy, just the last 5 minutes has demonstrated, it's easy to get caught up in the kind of the minutia of who's who and which one's which and who was there at what time. I'm not sure that, that's what we're supposed to take away. That's what we're supposed to really spend a lot of time trying to figure out, is exactly who did what. Each of the gospel writers has a little bit of a different account. That's not to say that one of them's wrong and one of them's right. It's just they record different details that pertain to the point or the message that they're trying to get across in the moment. And we've already seen that multiple times with Matthew, right? We've commented on Matthew sometimes records things out of chronological order for the purpose of putting things next to each other that go with one another. And so if Matthew is identifying a couple of these Marys or a couple of these ladies in a significant way, it's because it fits into his narrative. It fits into his story. Not that he's denying that there were other people there or that he forgot something or missed something. It's just this is the part that fits with his story. Johnny.
Well, if you look at it from the writer's point of view, if one of their mothers was there and was named Mary, they're going to mention their mother being there.
Okay.
So, you've got several of them having mothers named Mary. They're going to talk about their mother.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, there may have been it may have been that Matthew had a special connection with the other Mary that he mentions, and so there's a personal reason for him to include her in the story.
The only one who's not a Mary is the one who's identified as the mother of the sons of Zebedee, Salome, the sister of Mary, the mother of Jesus.
Right. Okay, so the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, her name was Salome, and she was the sister of Mary, the mother of Jesus. And so so there you have it. And the rest of them, all the other people in the club were named Mary. She was the only one that was allowed in, but she had a sister named Mary, so it was okay. So that's, and this, this thing I printed out here is 5 pages. I'm not sure it did me any good at all. But it was, You know, question 1, who went to Jesus' grave? Thanks, Johnny. I just read that one and it's like, oh man, head scratcher. So there were a bunch of Marys there. There were some other women involved too. There was Salome was there, and who knows that there might have been other women involved as well. You know, that were a part of this group that followed Jesus. And so they were involved. They were there for the crucifixion. They were there for the preparation of the body for burial in the tomb. They were there, the first ones there on Sunday morning. Who was the first one to see Jesus after he rose from the dead? It was Mary Magdalene. She was the very first one to see him. And so these women played a significant role in all the events that are taking place surrounding the resurrection of Jesus. In fact, Jesus has them take the message to his disciples, you know, tell them that I'm going to Galilee and I'll meet them there. So they were an important part of the story. So after the Marys get there, what do they find? Yeah. I like the way Matthew says it. He says, behold, a severe earthquake had occurred. Matthew, why did the earthquake occur? Well, because an angel came from heaven. You know, that's kind of the way it's worded. He says, a severe earthquake had occurred, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. Is that the kind of thing that happens every time an angel comes from heaven? There's a big earthquake? I mean, I don't think that's like a prerequisite, but something pretty special had happened there. And there was some significant natural phenomenon that had taken place when Jesus died. We talked about those things last week. Back in chapter 27, verse 50, Jesus cried out with a loud voice. He yielded up his spirit. The veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And what happened? The earth shook and the rocks were split apart. What does that sound like? Sounds like an earthquake. And so, you know, there's some significant things happening in the moment that Jesus dies, and in the moment that Jesus is resurrected, there's some significant things taking place. And so the two greatest events of human history, you know, the death of Jesus and the resurrection of Jesus, are kind of bookended by these earthquakes that take place. The angel rolls away the stone. Why did the stone have to be rolled away? I mean, Jesus had escaped from places before just by appearing or disappearing or seemingly walking through walls. Why did the stone need to be rolled away? Yeah, what are James and John going to do? In other gospel accounts, what happens when James and John get there? They go in the tomb and look. You know, they're wanting to see, is he really out of the tomb? And so it needed to happen to take place that the stone was rolled away. In one of the other gospel accounts, again, aren't the women talking amongst themselves? You know, how are we going to get into to be able to minister to the body, because the stone is very heavy and we can't move it. And so they were even worried about how to get into the tomb in the first place. And when they get there, it's already open. So there's the angel, the earthquake, the stone is rolled away. What did he look like? Looked like lightning, and his garments were as white as snow. Have we seen anybody who looked like that before? Jesus at the Transfiguration. Jesus appeared in his glorified form, and Moses and Elijah, who were there with him, were also in that form. And so we recognize this angel as a heavenly being based on his appearance. Beings that are described that way in the Bible are heavenly beings. And so he is in that form partially to identify who he was. He's not just some gardener. He's not just a passerby. He is a significant being. So that's an important detail in the story. What did the angel tell the women? Do not be afraid. Does that ever work when you tell somebody, don't be afraid? Did that work with your kids when they were scared of the dark? Oh, don't be scared of the dark. Were they scared? Were they not scared after that? Probably still scared. But the angel speaks to them in a reassuring way. Don't be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who has been crucified. What would be the most fearful part of this story for these women? The appearance of this angel in this form, or had they gotten there and there was nobody there and Jesus' body is missing? I think he stuck around, he hung around for the purpose of reassuring them that you're looking for Jesus, but he's not here. And if there was nobody there to tell the women, what was going on, that would have been a horrible occurrence. You show up and the body of Jesus is missing. This is a bad thing. And so I think he's there in order to give them that piece of the story that they're missing, because they don't understand or can't understand why he's gone if the angel is not there to tell them. Why is Jesus not there, the angel says? He is risen just as he said. He's been telling you what was going to take place. In fact, it's almost like, ladies, why are you here looking for him? This is what he said he was going to do. And so you came here expecting to minister to a dead body, but he's gone because he's alive like he said he was going to be in the first place. And then the angel invites them to come and see the place where he was lying. Don't take my word for it. Go in and look and see that he is not there in the tomb anymore. And then what are they supposed to do? Go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead. Why would there be this sense of urgency?
He would be telling them that he is risen, just like he said.
Uh-huh.
It's not news that you want to delay to tell, I suppose.
Yeah, why would you delay this news? Why would you stop and have a cup of coffee on the way there? This is the good news, right? The good news is the gospel story. It's the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And the good news is a message that has a sense of urgency behind it. And so we don't delay in telling people about it. We don't wait. We go and tell them in the moment. And so I think there's a great lesson there for us about go quickly and tell his disciples. We should be going quickly and telling others about the resurrection of Jesus. Where is Jesus going? He's going to meet him in Galilee. I mean, I don't know if there's a significance to that. Is there other than that's where he was from, and there's people there that he would know, and a sense of home, or what it is that he's going there first to appear in that place first before he makes any other public appearances? I'm not sure.
Because the priests are giving money to the soldiers to arrest.
Well, certainly from a physical standpoint, it would be unsafe for Jesus, but we're beyond that. I mean, we're past that point where Jesus has to worry about any physical threats at this point. There's nothing that the priests will be able to do to him, although they might be able to do things to his followers. There's a sense in which the disciples have to be careful about where they are and what they say, because they are being met with opposition even early after the resurrection of Jesus.
Maybe they just need to get away from Jerusalem
Yeah,
and the chaos.
maybe it just needed to be away from the chaos. I think we don't have a lot of detail recorded about what Jesus spent the next 40 days or so with his disciples doing before his ascension, but I would imagine that a lot of that was very, very personal, very targeted time being spent with them, and that Jesus really wasn't looking for the crowds of thousands and thousands of people like there had been at other times in his ministry. And so to get away from where all the people were in Jerusalem and kind of get off to a more remote area might have been what he was looking for, so he could have that time with his disciples. So the ladies go from the tomb, and they ran and reported it to his disciples, says they, with fear and great joy. Not two words that we typically associate with one another, fear and great joy. But fear, I think, in this case has that kind of that sense of awe or wonder and excitement and those kind of things, maybe more so than the fear that we typically think of. So they go to do that. So it's interesting to me, the angel tells them, go and tell the disciples that Jesus is risen. He's going to meet them in Galilee. And they go to do that. And then who shows up? Jesus. And so, they've already been given their mission. They've accepted their mission to go and tell the disciples. But Jesus still shows himself to them and reiterates that mission. Don't be afraid. Same thing the angel told them. Don't be afraid. Go and tell them that to leave the city and go to Galilee where they'll see me. Isn't that what the angel had already told them to say? And so Jesus is giving them the same message that the angel had already given them. I bet it was sweeter coming from the lips of Jesus than it was the angel. Not that there's anything wrong with the angel. Yeah.
So Jason, there's a sweet point here to me. These women, it was the women that were going to prepare Jesus for burial. It was the women that went to the burial site, to be there. And there's a certain part of serving the Lord that is showing up. It's the faith to show up.
Right.
And because they went, even though they didn't have anything to do but to grieve, they went to be where Jesus was, even though he was dead, and exhibited the faith that whatever was going to happen, they wanted to be there. They were used in a powerful way, and they got to be the first ones to see not only the empty tomb but Jesus. I think the lesson for us is, maybe a big part of serving God is to show up.
Okay. I like it. The ladies were there. They showed up that morning, and we don't know what the plans of the men were that day, if they had plans of coming later or being there, or if this was strictly a women's work or what. But they were there. Yeah. Be flexible, because they had one set of plans, but they changed. Right. And I think as you kind of reflect on what these ladies go through in this moment, this morning, as they're going to that tomb, they saw Jesus put to death on Friday. They spent all day Saturday mourning his death. They're there Sunday morning, and most of us, if not all of us, have lost people that we love dearly. And when we know that heartbreak, we know that pain. And for them to be able to, in a moment, go from that heartbreak and that expression of that heartbreak that they were going through, to minister to the body, to do it was all they had that they could do. They couldn't do anything else to be consoled or to console one another or console themselves, but they could take care of Jesus' body. And in doing that, they were expressing that grief and expressing that heartbreak. To flip that completely around from that utter heartbreak to a joy that can't even be described, and knowing that he's alive. It's got to be how does your heart take that? How does your heart not burst in the moment from that being broken and devastated to the point of being so joyful? But there they are, and they're the first ones. They're the ones that are expressing that grief in the most open way. They're the ones that get to first experience that joy of finding out that Jesus is alive. So what a tremendous testimony to their faithfulness and to their willingness to serve. Sometimes we've talked about this. Sometimes Matthew puts things next to each other as means of comparison. And so compare what the women here are going through and what they're experiencing with, and we have it kind of sandwiched. You have the women kind of there in the verse that we looked at the end of chapter 27, and then there's this segue into the religious leaders and the discussion that they have about, well, he said he was going to be raised, and so we need to post guards, and we need to seal the tomb, and Pilate gives them the authority to do all those things, so they do it. And so there's this, we have the women who are doing what they do, and then the religious leaders do what they do with the posting of the guards. Then we have the women coming to minister to the body of Jesus, and their response to Jesus' resurrection. And then we jump back over to the religious leaders again. So there's this back and forth that Matthew provides there for us. And in verse 11, while they were on the way, some of the guard came into the city and reported to the chief priests all that had happened. So, Mary and Salome, as they are making their way to the tomb, and all this stuff happens, and they experience all this stuff, there's other eyes that are seeing things happen too. The guards that were there were there. And so they have experienced that earthquake. They've seen the angel. They saw the tomb, the stone rolled away. Did they see Jesus exit the tomb, or were they too stunned in that moment? I don't know exactly what they saw, but they go and report to the religious leaders, to the chief priests, all that had happened, and then they have to have a response to that. It's like, it reminds me kind of some of the political shenanigans we see in our day and age, where when there's something that happens in a public way, the politicians have to have their response to it, and it has to be a political response, right? It has to be measured. It has to be, they have to appear to be in control, and they have to appear to not be at fault for anything, and they have to appear that that they've done everything they were supposed to do, and somebody else's fault, right? And so we have them getting this very political, measured response to the things that are taking place. Compare that to the response of the women. Their response in verse 8, they left the tomb with fear and great joy and ran to report it to his disciples. They were eager, they were thrilled, they were joyful to tell about what they had seen and experienced, versus the guards. Do you think there was a lot of joy as they run to tell the chief priests? Do you think there was a lot of excitement amongst the chief priests?
I think there's a lot of fear.
Maybe some other type of fear, the type of fear we're used to talking about. But yeah, they pay off the guards to say that while we were asleep, his followers came and stole the body. And the chief priests are like, we know that puts you in a bad position because what happens to a Roman soldier who is on guard duty and falls asleep? He's dead. I mean, he loses his life. There is no playing around with that. And so the chief priests understand, we're asking you to risk your lives to propagate this lie, this story. But if anyone takes notice of this story that we will take care of it for you. We'll smooth it over with your supervisors, your superiors. And so there's this concoction of this story, this lie that has to be told in order to make it look like they've still won, because they were declaring victory at the death of Jesus. And now that there's no body, they can't keep declaring victory unless they come up with a story to explain why there's no body. And so, the difference in responses to the resurrection of the Son of God is tremendous. You have the women who respond with joy and excitement. You have the guards that respond with fear. You have the chief priests that respond with a lie and with bribery and all those kind of things. So it begs the question. I think Matthew does that for a purpose. What is our response to the story of the resurrection of Jesus Christ? Everybody has to respond to that story in some way.
We can really think it through, because nobody's going to steal a body and leave the linens behind.
Yeah.
And no one's going to take the time to fold the one
Yeah.
that was wrapped around his head. If you're stealing something, you're stealing a dead body. You're going to get in there with the body, take everything
Yeah.
with it, and you're gone. You don't leave anything behind.
Yeah, there's so many things like that don't make sense. I mean, the least of which is like, how, if the disciples have stolen the body, why do they all willingly go to their own deaths to defend the lie that they have established by stealing the body of Jesus? You know, that makes no sense. You don't die for a lie. And so they are full believers of what has taken place. So the contrast of the responses to the resurrection of Jesus is just a tremendous study and a tremendous exercise as we kind of go through there and decide what is our response going to be, and who do we want to be like? Do we want to be like the women at the tomb, or do we want to be like the chief priests and the guards in our response? So after this, the 11 disciples go where? Well, imagine that. They go where Jesus asked them to go. And so they go to Galilee to await Jesus, and he shows up. He's there to the mountain which Jesus had designated. And when they saw him, what did they do? They worshiped. Is there any other response? Is there anything else they could do? Some were doubtful. How long did that doubt last, you think? I hope not very long. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 10, verse 9, therefore God highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, of those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. The ones that bow and worship Jesus, that's the proper response. There's nothing else that you could do that would be a more proper response than to bow and worship. And those who refuse to bow and worship in this life eventually will. And it's one of those things, I don't ever suggest starting off a Bible study with that or finishing with it. Well, if you won't do it now, you will do it eventually. That's not the approach to take. That's not what I'm saying. That's all that can happen. I mean, it's not that there's, Jesus will have some kind of a magic wand and he will force you to bow, and you'll be saying, no, I don't want to bow. And we will see him and we will bow. There's nothing else, there will be no other response. Because in that moment when we see him, we will recognize who he is, we will recognize what he is, and we will recognize who we are in comparison, and the only possible response is to bow and worship. And so it's best to choose to do it in this life than to come to the late realization in the next life that you had no other choice, because there was no other response that is worthy. So it's a...
Matthew doesn't record it, but it's interesting that he went to Mary Magdalene and she didn't recognize him.
Yeah.
She thought he was a gardener.
Yeah.
And then there was a couple of guys
On the road to Emmaus, yeah.
They were said, haven't you heard what's been going on?
Yeah.
They get to talking to him about this.
Yeah.
So he either some way had fixed it so that they didn't recognize him, or
Yeah.
or he was different.
Yeah. And that's that's an interesting, that's it. It's always interests me as well. If these were true disciples, if they were followers of Jesus, how did they not recognize him? Yeah. Mary Magdalene had washed his feet, and, she should have, from the standpoint of knowing him physically and who he was, she would have recognized him as easily as anybody. And how did she not, in the moment, in one of the other gospel accounts, recognize him just right off the bat? And is it because he had, had for a purpose, was revealing himself to her in a special way? Yeah. And so we don't know if it was according to something that Jesus was doing, or if it was just not because she wasn't expecting it. I see people now at Walmart that it's not where I'm used to seeing them, and I don't have a clue who they are, but then it's like I see them the next day back at school where they belong. Oh yeah, that's. But yeah, but they were close, and I would recognize you, Jim, at Walmart. Yeah.
Luke 24:31, that's the road to Emmaus, that says that their eyes were open. It
Yeah.
seems like it was a intentional thing.
Earlier in the chapter it says their eyes were prevented from seeing him, so that's the other side of that.
Okay.
Jesus didn't.
Their eyes, verse 16, their eyes were prevented from recognizing it. Yeah, that was the two men on the road. Their eyes were prevented from seeing him, and so there was some. Yeah, and there, I think there's in those cases there was some purpose that Jesus had in mind of revealing himself in a way and having that discussion first, so that it could be an unvarnished discussion of not them deferring to him because of who he was, but them having that honest discussion, and then realizing who he was later. Yeah, and as soon as in verse 9, Jesus met them and greeted them, and it's the women together, and they worship as well. And so that's a good point, same as the 11 do when Jesus sees them at in Galilee. And so they are revealing what they believe about Jesus and what they think about him in that response that they have. So Matthew doesn't record Jesus saying a whole lot after his resurrection. He has the one verse in verse 10 to the ladies, and then he has just here at the end of Matthew 28. What does he say to the disciples? How does he start? All authority has been given to him. Was Jesus able to make that statement, all authority has been given to me, before this point? He was sent by God.
I mean, you could kind of say, yeah. I mean, because he's, in different places he says, "I and the Father are one."
Uh-huh.
And before Abraham was, I am. And things like that. So I mean, yeah, I guess you could say that. But it seems like this is a different, kind of a different interpretation or whatever. When he says it here at the end of Matthew.
Yeah.
Well, this is referring to religiously, yes. He's establishing the covenant that he came to
Yeah.
establish. And that's where his authority is.
Yeah. Jesus always, one of the things that the crowds marveled about Jesus was that he taught with authority. He taught having an authority that was beyond what they were used to seeing from the religious leaders of the day, because he could demonstrate his ability to speak the will of God in ways that their rabbis were not able to demonstrate. So Jesus had a greater authority than anybody who had ever presented themselves to the crowds before. But was his authority this complete before his resurrection? I think I think this is the moment. This is Jesus has completed. He has subjugated himself, submitted himself so fully and completely to the will of the Father through everything that he had done up to that point, even to the death on the cross, that at the resurrection, that's when God recognizes him as the sacrificial replacement for our sins. That's when God recognizes him as the one upon whom the church will be built, the kingdom will be built. It's at that point that he is able to take the throne at the right hand of the seat of God. All of those things that happened before this, the death, burial, resurrection, the perfect life, all of those things had to happen in order for the final chapter to be written. And that final chapter is the one that Jesus here begins to reveal to his disciples, and then will be fully revealed through the Holy Spirit through the rest of the writing of the New Testament about how that kingdom is going to grow. Jesus Jesus entered into Jerusalem as a king to be crowned, as his coronation march, the triumphal entry. And it was this resurrection that is his coronation. He now is king. And he is not fully king. He's the anointed king. He's the king to be all the way up to this point. But now he is the king. And who has supreme authority? The king. All authority has been given to me. Why? Because I am the king. I now have a kingdom that I can rule over. And so all authority has been given to Jesus in heaven and on earth. And it's an authority that goes beyond what he was able to claim before that, because he had not been crowned king up until his resurrection. Is that going to undo what I just said? Good. I like when stuff agrees with what I think. Romans 14:9. Okay, so for this end Christ died and lived again, that he might be Lord both of the dead and of the living. What was that verse you just said? Romans 1:4. That's the one I was looking for a second ago, but I was looking in the wrong book. In Romans 1:4, he was declared the Son of God with power by the resurrection from the dead, according to the Spirit of holiness, Jesus Christ our Lord. And so it's like we said at the very beginning, we said this story is incomplete without the resurrection. Without the resurrection, we wouldn't even be here. It would be a waste, a complete and utter waste of time to study the life of Jesus if he wasn't raised. But because he was raised, everything else matters. And it's this resurrection that places him in this position to be able to say to his disciples, all authority has been given to me. Now I'm going to put you guys to work. I was preparing you through all the things that we did up to this point. Now is when you get your marching orders. Go ahead.
He has all authority. But then at the end, if you look in 1 Corinthians, the 15th chapter, beginning with the 24th verse, he said, then comes the end, when he delivers the kingdom to the God the Father after destroying every rule and every authority and power. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. He has all authority until the end.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to say, when all things are subjected to him, then the Son himself will also be subjected to him, who put all things in subjection under him, that God may be all in all.
Okay. So God has given him authority for this period in which the kingdom is in existence. And at the end, he will present the kingdom to God and take his place back in subjection to the Father. All right. I like it.
Well, thinking back to your earlier lessons as we were going through, we would say, as he was doing miracles, well, he proved he had authority or power over bodily diseases, over nature, over even with Lazarus, raising Lazarus over death. And then this one, his own resurrection.
Right. And this is the final claim of authority. He in all of those instances demonstrates the authority that has been given to him by God every step of the way. Jesus never does anything outside of the authority of God's will. And in proving himself faithful of doing all those things in accordance with God's will, that final presentation of authority that God gives him is all authority. You don't need my supervision anymore. You have proven yourself faithful in everything. It's all yours now. Go and do with it what needs to be done, and then when it's over, it's ready to be presented back to God. So with that authority, what does Jesus do? Yeah. It seems significant to me that Jesus makes this statement of authority. All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. I am the king. I am reigning as king. Okay, king, what do you want us to do? Here it is. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age.
Jason, it may be semantics, but Daniel 7:13 and 14 said that he saw in the night of vision one like the Son of Man appeared before the Ancient of Days. Jesus still had to go before God before he was crowned king.
Yes.
He told that parable about that very same thing in Luke 19.
Okay.
A nobleman that went into a far country to receive the kingdom, and he was comparing that to himself going away to get the kingdom. So to say that he already was crowned king would be a little premature. He had to ascend to the Father first.
He had to ascend to the Father first, Acts chapter 1. Yes. Okay. So it's the... So let's see, where are we at in the coronation process then? We're there. We're right there. And I think you're right. I appreciate that. That is the final step that has to be taken, is that Jesus does have to present himself before the Father, because it's only God that has the authority to give Jesus that authority or to crown him as king. And until Jesus presents himself before the Father, he can't receive that bestowing. So, but Jesus speaking here, it's kind of one of those things where when God speaks of something that's going to take place, we can speak of it as having already taken place. We have salvation now, even though I haven't died and gone to heaven. I have it. I own it. It's mine. And so Jesus hasn't presented himself before the Father to receive that coronation yet, but it's his. It's his for the taking, or for the giving. Whichever direction you want to look at it from. So Jesus speaking as that king does still give them their marching orders to go and make disciples. And this is what it becomes about. From this point forward, it becomes about the kingdom. It becomes about, Jesus, a king can only be a king if he has a kingdom. And if there is no kingdom, what does the king do? And so Jesus will be king regardless of whether we are faithful or not. But how much better is it for him to be king of a large kingdom? And that's our responsibility. That's what he lays before us, to go and to teach and to make disciples. Closing thoughts on Matthew? Look at that. For 28 weeks now, I've been trying to finish on time, and now I've got 3 minutes left, and I don't know what else to say. Matthew's not the end, it's the beginning. It's the beginning of the kingdom, which takes place on the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2, the establishment of that kingdom. But we're in that transition period.
Well, I think those marching orders too, it's clear that baptism is also the beginning. The teaching them to obey all things I've commanded you is the nurturing part that we all have to make sure we are faithful.
Right. I appreciate that. Baptism is part of that process, but there's also there's the making disciples, there's the teaching, there's the reinforcing of those things that has to take place as well. All right. Well, thank you for your attention for today and the previous months. There's 8 loaves of bread in the kitchen. People can take one. I'd heard we started out with just 1 loaf, and Michael's been doing something.